All right, guys, I'm going to pick up where I left off last time. I still got a little bit of a cough, and I'm not feeling very well, but I'll try to get through this video if I can. So my voice may sound a little weird to you today. Anyway, last time we were talking about hormones in the bloodstream, and we got to the section where I was about to talk about half-life. And if you know anything about half-life, if you've studied radioactive decay or anything like that, it's a little different than what you might think. When you start out with a certain amount of a hormone, in this case, it's going to basically get broken down into half its amount in a certain amount of time. So let's say we have 10 grams of hormone. I'm just giving you a nice round number. And let's say its half-life is 5 minutes. So after 5 minutes, that 10 grams now will be 5 grams, all right? Now, if we go another 5 minutes, you would think, well, the rest of it would go away. But that's not how half-life works. So when we were left with 5 after the first 5 minutes, the second 5 minutes elapses and we're down to 2.5. So it simply divides in half each time, right? So half-life is basically the time required for the level of hormone to decrease by half. And this can be anywhere from a fraction of a minute to a week, depending on the hormone. You know, a hormone like growth hormone, for instance, may stick around for a long time. We want it to work for a long period of time, especially when we're going through puberty and that type of thing. So, again, others like adrenaline, we may want those hormones to go away rather quickly. We want them to work fast, but we also want them to leave fast. We don't want to be in that heightened sense of awareness for an extended period of time. That's pretty rough on the body. All right. Excuse me. This thing's going to take forever again to switch over. Let's see here. I don't know why it does this every single time. Right, so hopefully this thing will switch over in just a second. But again, just to give you an idea of half-life, if we start out with 10, we'll go to 5, and then after the next time period, we'll go to 2.5, and then 1.25, and so on until we get down to a very negligible amount, and then that can be removed from the body. Now, speaking of removal, there's a couple of ways that we can get rid of hormones. One is degrading enzymes. We have enzymes that will break the hormone down. Sometimes the kidney or the liver will be able to remove that from our system and let it exit the body that way. This is taking way longer than it normally does. There we go. All right. So again, just like we have with half-lives, we have varied response times with hormones as well. Some are immediate. Some, especially some of our steroid hormones, can take hours or days to do what they need to do. And then others are inactive until they enter the target cell itself. So the response is usually limited. It ranges, again, from seconds to hours, and they can disappear very rapidly, or they can persist for a long amount of time. It just depends on the hormone and how the body deals with that hormone, how we need that hormone level to stay for a period of time. You know, again, like growth hormone, we want it to stay high while we're growing, and then when we reach adulthood, we want to shut it off. And that's usually what happens, and that will cause the growth plates to fuse in our bones, and that will also help us, as we grow through those growing years. But it'll stop, and we'll look at some disorders here in a minute. When sometimes these hormones get out of balance and they do some weird things to the body. They're really profound chemical messages. And just a small increase or decrease in the amount of hormone can have a really big or even sometimes deadly effect on the body. Right? So we'll look at that in just a minute. Right? So again, the difference between the two types of hormones, the lipid-based and the water-based, we went over that the other day. We're also going to determine the duration and hormone activity. So they're going to behave differently from one another in how they react with the cell, but they're also going to behave differently when we have to get rid of them. Right? So our lipid-soluble hormones, our steroid hormones, thyroid hormone, these are what we call lipid-soluble, and then our amino acid-based hormones are the ones that are water-soluble. So I'm going to give you a list on Blackboard, and I'm going to go over that with you in a minute when I pull it up. but it's going to list whether they are amino acid based or steroid based. And you're going to need to know that for your test. There'll be a matching section where you'll have to match the hormone up with its type. Sounds hard, and it could be if you do it wrong, but if you do it right, there aren't that many of the steroid-based hormones. And if you'll memorize those, you'll know everything else is amino acid-based, and that'll help you to remember it easier. It's just a little study trick, and I'll go over that with you. Let me just go ahead and pull that up and bring that up now while we're talking about it before I forget. Let's see here. That's not it. Let's see what's in here. I lost a bunch of files over this summer when I was teaching. One of my flash drives went out. I'm having to go back and find everything. Let's see if I put those in here or not. No. Well, I'll come back to it and I'll find it. I may have to go hunt it down somewhere. Oh crap! I didn't mean to do that. Let's see. Right. So I'll come back to that and show you that document in a minute. I don't want to waste all the video time here. Now, multiple hormones may act on the same target at the same time, and there's a couple ways that hormones interact with each other. We have what's called permissiveness, where one hormone cannot exert its full effects without another hormone being present. So reproductive hormones, for instance, they need the effects of thyroid hormone in order to work properly. So especially in females, which tend to have more thyroid issues than male, if you have an over or underactive thyroid, it can have reproductive effects as well. That's one reason endocrinology is so hard. You have to trace back and see. It may not be the actual hormone that you're looking at that's causing the problem. It may be another hormone that's needed that's not being produced. And it's usually kind of a chain of events. This hormone will cause this one to be released and cause this one to have an effect, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to go back into that chain and figure out where is that weak link. Is it the thyroid causing the reproductive issue versus the reproductive organs? Maybe they're working fine, but without that thyroid hormone, they're not going to be able to reach their full effect. And so it's a little difficult sometimes in pinpointing these things. We also have a lot of releasing hormones and things that are released by the pituitary that will cause another organ in the body to release its hormone, and then that hormone will cause another release somewhere else. So you have to go through that whole chain of events and figure out which one's actually causing the problem. Right? Now, synergism is where more than one hormone produces the same effect, but it amplifies. So glucagon and epinephrine both cause the liver to release glucose, and together they are stronger than either one would be by itself. So in order to get that glucose level to rise very quickly, we have both of those hormones that act. Epinephrine, basically adrenaline, and then glucagon is going to break glycogen down into glucose. And that's going to cause our blood glucose level to elevate. Right? If you'll remember, I don't know if I've talked about this too much, but glucagon is kind of the opposite of insulin. They work against one another. Insulin lowers the blood sugar, whereas glucagon elevates the blood sugar. And they stay in balance. As long as we have both around, everything's fine. But when we start having like type 1 diabetes where we're not producing enough insulin, then that glucagon is going to have more of an effect, and that's going to cause your blood glucose to spike. And that's why people with diabetes have to take insulin in order to bring it back down. They have to balance that back out. Antagonism, basically, I forgot this was on the next slide. But this is where one or more hormones oppose the other. So again, my example I just used of insulin and glucagon is a great example of antagonism. One works in one direction, one works in the other, and that stays in balance. Now we're going to start looking at some of the organs of the endocrine system and see what each does, and then look at some disorders that can occur with each one. The hypothalamus is our neuroendocrine organ, and it's connected to the pituitary gland, and we call the pituitary the hypophysis. So you may hear me talk about adenohypophysis or neurohypophysis. That's just simply referring to the pituitary gland, and it's made up of two lobes or two sides, and one is more neural and the other is more glandular. And we'll see in a minute when we start going through some of the hormones. There are some that are produced by the pituitary, and then there's others that are produced in the hypothalamus that are stored by the pituitary, right? So we need to look and see which side does what. So the posterior pituitary is composed of neural tissue that secretes neural hormones. They do not make hormones, or the pituitary does not make hormones on this side. It only stores hormones. So hormones like ADH and oxytocin that are produced by the hypothalamus are stored in the posterior pituitary, or the neurohypophysis, and then they are released as needed. The anterior pituitary, and it's easy to remember which is which, anterior, adeno, they both start with A, is the adenohypophysis, and this is glandular tissue. So this is where we actually make hormones, right? So again, the posterior is in direct connection with the brain, so it has that neural connection. And basically, it's going to secrete two hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus, oxytocin and ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. And we'll talk more about it later when we get to that section and what it does. But these are stored here. They are not made here, right? So again, that list that I'm going to bring up later that has all the lipid-based hormones versus the water-soluble hormones, I also want you to know where they are made, right? Now make sure you understand that word, where they are made. So oxytocin and ADH, even though they're released from the posterior pituitary, they're not made there. They're made in the hypothalamus, right? So when we get to that point where I'll show you the document where I have all the hormones listed, I'll go over that with you and kind of point those things out to you, okay? So here is our neurohypophysis. Again, we have that direct connection to the hypothalamus here, and again, we release oxytocin and antidiuretic. They are made up here, but they're stored down here and then released into the bloodstream. Right? So this is our posterior pituitary. The one that's kind of shaded out here, this is our adenohypophysis, or our anterior pituitary. This is where we actually make hormones, right? And I'll go over those with you in a minute. So again, the hypothalamus is going to synthesize oxytocin, or antidiuretic hormone. That's then going to travel down the axons of the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract into the posterior pituitary, where they are stored, and then they are released as we need them. Right? So again, these oxytocin and ADH molecules are made in the hypothalamus, and they are stored down here in the posterior pituitary. Right? Right. The anterior lobe is derived from an outpocket oral mucosa, and it is going to make hormones in this section. So this area is going to actually create the hormones, not just store them, but they actually make them. So we have what's called releasing and inhibiting hormones that regulate hormone secretion in other organs of the body. And sometimes you'll hear the pituitary called the master gland. And that's kind of true in that it does control all of the other hormone producing organs in the body, but really the hypothalamus is the one that kind of controls everything. But we do say that the pituitary kind of is the master gland because it does secrete all of these releasing and inhibiting hormones. So now you can see this side is enlightened on here, and again, these hormones are made here. So growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and prolactin are all going to be made in the anterior pituitary. Right? So again, they are made here, and basically they are going to be released as we need them. And from their name, you can kind of get what they do. Growth hormone stimulates growth. Thyroid stimulating hormone, that stimulates the thyroid. In fact, in lab, when we're doing our PhysioX, the first one, you're going to be working with a rat that has its thyroid removed, and we're going to be looking at thyroid stimulating hormone and thyroid hormone and how they work. So hopefully you'll get a little bit almost hands-on type study with that. So Those Physio X are really nice. I like them because they do let you do some real world stuff that you couldn't normally do in our lab. We don't have rats and things that we can go and operate on, but virtually we can do that. Right. So again, the posterior pituitary stores and secretes oxytocin and ADH. So again, they are almost identical hormones, but they differ in 2 amino acids, and that makes all the difference in the world. So again, these two are stored in the posterior and released as needed, but they are made in the hypothalamus. Right. So oxytocin, you're probably, if you've ever had a child, familiar with this one. They may have used it to induce labor, but this is what's going to stimulate uterine contractions during childbirth. It also acts as a hormonal trigger for milk ejection. I know it's amazing sometimes when I used to breed blue chick coon hounds, and I remember I had a litter of puppies one time, and this dog had no milk whatsoever. She delivered, and I mean, within just a few minutes, boom. I mean, it was like the faucet turned on. So these hormones are really profound. They can make big changes occur very rapidly in the body. Right? Oxytocin is also a neurotransmitter in the brain, and it also is that hormone that we think is associated with love and bonding. It helps the mother to bond with the child. And anytime we hug someone or we're close with someone, we release oxytocin. And that's that bonding hormone that helps us to bond with another human being. This is also the reason when you first meet somebody, you feel all giddy inside, and you feel that that effect of falling in love. And then over time, that usually passes, and it usually kind of fades away. And it's because the hormone level is going down. So the longer you're with someone, the less that oxytocin is playing a role in the bonding, and especially if you're not around that person a lot and in physical contact with them, you can lose that very rapidly. And we see that a lot in new relationships. People dive in and they're like all head over heels in love, and then once they kind of wake up from that hormone, they realize, ooh, what am I doing here? And that happens. So again, that's that hormone that triggers that. ADH, this is going to prevent us from urinating. So again, anti-diuretic. So the opposite of a diuretic. Remember, a diuretic makes you pee, whereas anti-diuretic prevents it. So as long as you're producing ADH, your body's going to try to conserve water. So the kidneys, tubules are not going to allow as much water to go into the urine. This is also triggered by pain and low blood pressure and even drugs. I'll give you a good example of one you're probably familiar with. If you drink alcohol in excess, eventually you start to have to urinate. When you finally start, you usually have to keep going and going and going, and you will dehydrate yourself. The reason is you're numbing the hypothalamus, and when you do, it stops producing ADH, and then that tells the kidneys just to get rid of all the water in your body. And you start peeing and peeing and peeing, and then the next morning you wake up with a hangover because you dehydrated yourself, and that's part of what causes that. So if you do drink alcohol, especially if you drink more than you should, you need to drink a lot of water with that. Usually a good rule of thumb is for every drink a glass of water, and that usually will restore that amount of water that you're losing through urination. So again, it's inhibited by alcohol, diuretics. These are going to, again, make you want to pee because you're not getting that hormone response telling you not to pee. All right, and that's what ADH does. It basically tells you not to lose water. But if you inhibit that with alcohol or other diuretics, then you're going to go to the bathroom a lot. High concentrations causes vasoconstriction. So sometimes you'll hear this called vasopressor. That's the same hormone. It's just a different name for it. So again, vasoconstriction just means narrowing down the vascular tissue. So any of your arteries and veins and things like that can be triggered by vasopressin to constrict and to block blood flow. All right, you can look at some of these. I'll come back to this with that other chart that I'm going to show you. So I'm just going to skip over that. All right, so a couple of imbalances that we can have. Excuse me, let me grab something to drink. Um, so a couple of homeostatic imbalances that we can have is diabetes insipidus, and this is where we don't produce enough ADH. If the hypothalamus is damaged or the pituitary is damaged, this person is going to kind of act like a person that's under the influence of alcohol. They're going to pee all the time, and they're just going to keep going and going and going, and eventually they'll dehydrate. So they must stay hydrated. We now have synthetic hormones though to treat this, where a person can take ADH and kind of control it that way, so they don't have to constantly drink and urinate. And then the dumbest name I've ever heard for a disease is syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. You think they're going to come up with something better than that, but this is the opposite. This is where we have too much ADH, and now we're going to retain fluid. Your brain could even swell. You can have fatal issues with this. So again, this person would be put on diuretics of some sort, so that they can urinate and get rid of that excess water. Because in this case, the body is telling the kidney, hey, we need to conserve everything all the time, and it doesn't allow you to form urine as well as you should. So again, this is going to cause fluid retention, headaches, disorientation. It can even be fatal, again, in severe cases. All right, so here are the anterior pituitary hormones. Right? So these are peptides, which means they are amino acid based. Right? And all but growth hormone activate target cells via that cyclic AMP, second messenger system we went over the other day. So again, these guys have to attach to a receptor on the outside of the cell and then cause a chain of events to trigger the action on the inside of the cell. All right? So all but two of these are tropic hormones that regulate secretion of other hormones. So again, you can see those listed as tropics here. And so these are going to stimulate other organs. And they usually kind of tell you what organ they're going to stimulate. So thyroid stimulating hormone, again, stimulates the thyroid to release thyroid hormone or thyroxine. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, that's going to act on the adrenal gland and cause it to secrete its hormones. Follicle stimulating hormone, that's going to stimulate the follicle or the egg production. And then luteinizing hormone is also another one involved in sexual reproduction and gamete formation. And then prolactin, that one, as its name implies, is going to induce milk production. Right? Lactose is the sugar in milk. That's where the lactin comes in there. So pro meaning to encourage. So that's going to encourage milk production. Right. So growth hormone, this one is going to have direct actions on metabolism. It's basically going to allow for glucose metabolism. It also has anti-insulin effects, so it's going to cause the cells to want to grow and multiply, the bones to grow, the muscles to grow. It also breaks down glycogen into, or triggers the breakdown of glycogen into glucose, and that gives the extra fuel that the body needs for protein synthesis and for growth. Okay? So just as the name implies, growth hormone, or GH, you may hear it called HGH. People now take this as a supplement sometimes. I'm not big on taking hormones that your body doesn't normally produce. I kind of see every time that we mess with those, something bad happens. For a while, people were taking hormone replacement after menopause, and then they figured out that that was leading to breast cancer. Males now are taking testosterone when they get older, and we're starting to see some effects from it, and there may be an incident with testicular cancer and things. So I don't really like messing with hormones. They're really powerful, and once you start taking an outside source, your body stops producing its own, and then you're kind of stuck taking those. So that's something to think about too. You start taking testosterone, and then your body says, well, I got plenty now, I don't need to make anymore. And your body will shut down. And then if you quit taking it, your body's testosterone level will really fall quickly. So again, messing with these hormones, I'm not a big fan of that. So even though people take HGH, it supposedly makes them feel younger and more vigorous and have more energy and that kind of thing, more sexual desire, there's always a side effect to doing that. Right, so indirect actions on growth. Growth hormone triggers the liver, skeletal muscle, and bone to produce insulin-like growth factors, and then these can stimulate the DNA to synthesize proteins. And this can make us, the DNA doesn't actually synthesize the protein, but it stimulates protein production. Most of the cells in the body are going to be affected by growth hormone. So most cells are going to enlarge and divide, but the major targets are the bones and the skeletal muscle. And we see this especially in young men. You'll see these huge growth spurts. You'll look at him one day, and he's 5 foot tall. The next day, he's 6 feet tall. It seems like males go through some of those really rapid growth spurts within, several weeks. You can add several inches sometimes to the body. So again, these are very profound chemical messengers, and they have a big effect on the body. So messing with those balances sometimes can cause some trouble. Right? Now, what regulates the secretion of growth hormone? It's going to have its own hypothalamic hormones that will stimulate its production and release. So growth hormone, releasing hormone, stimulates the release of it. Again, these hormones typically have the name. I mean, they're pretty easy to remember. I mean, growth hormone, releasing hormone. Well, it tells you it's going to stimulate the release of growth hormone. And then we also have growth hormone inhibiting hormone, and that's going to be triggered by the increase in growth hormones and IGF levels. And then ghrelin is a hunger hormone, also stimulates growth hormone release. So when I get hungry, that's bringing food into the body, and that's going to be used for energy for growth, and that helps to stimulate it as well. We'll talk more about ghrelin later when we get to the digestion system, and I'll talk about its role in hunger and that type of thing. Right, I like charts. That's just me. I'm a visual person where I can see things broken down. It just seems to help me to understand things a little better. So this is a good chart to look at, and it shows you even the feedback loops that shut things down. Remember these negative feedback loops, once we get up to a certain level, it's going to stop producing these hormones. We don't need it anymore, so the body's going to shut it down. Right? So here we have growth hormone. Again, it's going to affect the liver tissues, make them produce insulin growth factors, or insulin-like growth factors, and that's going to then affect the skeletal muscle and the extraskeletal system. And then hormone also is going to help with fat metabolism, help us break it down. That's one reason people like to take it as a supplement. It helps you to lose weight. And then carbohydrate metabolism, it helps break down carbohydrates into sugars that we can use for energy and growth. So again, this is a good chart to look at to kind of show you what everything where everything happens and what its actions are doing. So again, I like charts. That's just me. May not make any sense to you, but to me, that's the best way for me to look at things. Right. So a couple of imbalances, and we see this sometimes, especially in other countries. In this country, we tend to be able to figure out these problems early and solve them before they become an issue. So hypersecretion of growth hormone, that's usually because someone has a tumor in their pituitary. A lot of our athletes and things that are really tall sometimes have this problem. I remember a guy from China that was coming over about, probably 8, 9 years ago maybe, and he had a pituitary tumor, and it had made him almost 8 feet tall. And they were trying to get him to play basketball in the NBA. He just never quite made it. They worked with him and did surgery on him to remove the tumor so that he would stop growing. But he never had the coordination. He never could develop that enough to be a professional athlete. So I think he went back to China, but at least he got the surgery he needed to prevent him from continuously growing, because that's what will happen. These tumors develop. If it happens before the growth plates fuse, you get what's called gigantism, where you can reach heights of 8 feet tall. The problem with that is you kind of outgrow the organs of the body, and you tend to die at a very early age, late 20s, early 30s max. If it happens after the growth plates fuse, then we only get overgrowth of the hands, feet, and face, and we call that acromegaly. Right? And I'll show you some pictures in a minute of some of these. Hyposecretion of growth hormone, where we're not producing enough, can cause pituitary dwarfism. Now, again, this isn't a big problem in the United States because we have synthetic growth hormone. Simply give it to the child, and they will usually grow to normal size. But if not, they may only reach a height of about 4 feet. And again, in other countries, this can be a problem, but here we tend to diagnose this early and are able to give artificial hormone. Right? So here you can see gigantism. I don't think that's Robert Wadlow. That's another guy. There was a famous one, Robert Wadlow, in America back in I think the 20s. He lived to be, I believe, 27 years old. So again, people like this will develop rapidly, and they will just keep growing and growing and growing until the body finally can't sustain itself anymore. Here you can see somebody with pituitary dwarfism, and then here you can see a normal size human. So again, any little imbalance in these hormones can cause some really profound effects. If you guys are old enough to remember Andre the Giant, the wrestler, he had both gigantism and acromegaly. He kind of his tumor hit right at the end of puberty, so he still had a little bit of growth left, and his growth plates finally fused, and then he started getting bigger. You've ever seen pictures of him holding a beer can or something? His hand is huge. Makes the can look like it's nothing. So again, he was a very large man, and if you remember him from back in the day, I believe he's in, what movie was that? The Princess Bride or something like that he was in. So you might know him from that as well. Right. Thyroid stimulating hormone, this is also going to be called thyrotropin. So it's going to cause the thyroid to secrete its hormones. Right? So as the hormone levels rise in the bloodstream, the thyroid hormone levels, it's going to go through that negative feedback and shut down thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's what normally happens in the body. We'll produce thyroid stimulating hormone. It'll make the thyroid secrete thyroxine. Once that level gets to an appropriate level, we shut off the thyroid stimulating hormone, and that shuts down the thyroid. Sometimes we have problems, and especially females typically have more problems with thyroid than male, and that can be an issue where you're not shutting down that thyroid stimulating hormone, or in another case, the opposite. You may be producing too much of it and making the thyroid become overactive. So you can be over or under depending on that. So it may not be the thyroid that's the problem. It may be the pituitary. So we may not be producing this thyroid stimulating hormone properly. So that's what makes it, again, so hard to diagnose a lot of these cases, because it may not be the thyroid itself. It may be the thyroid stimulating hormone that's not inducing the thyroid to do what it should. Right? So again, you can kind of see the inhibition here. Again, another chart. But the hypothalamus is going to produce our thyroid releasing hormone. That's going to go to the pituitary, and that's going to basically produce thyroid stimulating hormone, and then that's going to go to the thyroid, and that will produce T3 and T4. Once those levels get high enough, we come back and we shut down these two areas so that we don't keep inducing the thyroid to produce more hormone, right? But again, if something goes wrong anywhere back in this chain of events, then that can affect the thyroid gland and cause it not to work properly. And that's what you're going to be doing again with the rats in the lab. You're going to be going through that PhysioX and working with those and dealing with thyroid hormone. Now, adrenocorticotropic hormone, this is called corticotropin. At times, we'll refer to it as adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. So this is going to stimulate the adrenal cortex to release corticosteroids. And we'll go over what each one of those steroids do in a minute. I may have to stop here in a few. My voice is about to give out. But this is going to be triggered by the hypothalamus, corticotropin releasing hormone, in a daily rhythm. And the highest levels are in the morning. This is another reason why it's a good idea, along with cortisol, which is involved in this, to get up and work out in the morning. It's more beneficial to you than working out at night, because this is when these levels of hormone are highest, and we can kind of burn them up and get rid of them, so they're not wanting to put fat into the body. So cortisol is a stress hormone. It also contributes to fat being laid down. So the more cortisol you have in your system, the more fat you're going to tend to put on. So if you burn that off in the morning, then you're not going to be putting fat on all day. So that's another reason to get up early and get out and run or work out or do something like that. The gonadotropin, follicle-stimulating hormone, or luteinizing hormone, again, these are involved in the production of gametes, eggs or sperm. And then luteinizing hormone is also going to help with the egg and the menstrual cycle. We'll go over this in detail when we get to the reproductive system at the end of the semester. And then luteinizing hormone also stimulates testosterone production in the male as well. So again, these are anterior pituitary hormones. They're made there, and they're released and go to other parts of the body and have their effects there. All right. Now, in pubescent girls and boys, we do not have follicle stimulate and luteinizing hormone. This is going to be triggered after we start going through puberty. Right? Again, we don't need them until the eggs and the sperm go through their cycle to become fertile. So these are not going to be around until we go through puberty, and then they start rising in the blood. Now, we'll look at some other disorders later involving children that's pretty graphic. I used to show a picture of it, and I kind of stay away from it now because it kind of bothered some people. But the adrenal gland, if it's not functioning properly or overactive, it can have some weird side effects where kids will go through puberty at 2, 3, 4 years old. I don't know if you know this, but the youngest girl to ever have a child was 5 years old. And she had a full-term child, and it lived. And so her child was only 5 years younger than she was as they got older. So again, it's a weird thing when it happens. But I'll go over that with you when we get to the adrenal gland. Prolactin, again, this stimulates milk production in female. Don't really know exactly what it does in males, even though we have it, not known exactly what it does. This is going to be controlled by prolactin inhibiting hormone. Basically is dopamine, and dopamine can act in other places in the brain and stuff as a feel-good chemical as well. So again, this is going to lead to lactation once the mother delivers a child. Okay. So it's the increased estrogen level that's going to stimulate prolactin-releasing hormone, and then that's going to also help play a role in the menstrual cycle as well. But mainly this one is involved with pregnancy. So towards the end, you're going to see blood levels rise, and then as the baby suckles, prolactin is going to be stimulated. Also, that oxytocin is going to be released, and that's going to make the mother want to bond with the child. And they've done study after study that breastfeeding is the best way to bond with your child because you will start producing those hormones. If you don't breastfeed, you're not going to produce as much, and you may not bond as well with the child. They've done a lot of studies on that to see the effects on motherhood and things like that when breastfeeding doesn't occur. So it's a good idea if you can to breastfeed if at all possible. Also, a lot of antibodies and things are passed to the child that you've built up over the years, and that can help the child survive as well. It's nature's way. It's what nature intended us for us to do. Right. So hypersecretion of prolactin is more common than hyposecretion. So hyposecretion is not a problem unless you're a nursing mother. Again, if you're not producing enough prolactin, you may not produce enough milk, and you may not be able to breastfeed. And there are a lot of women that happens to, where you just can't produce milk, and you have to use formula and stuff like that. Hyperprolactinemia is the most frequent abnormality of pituitary tumors, and basically you can have inappropriate lactation, lack of menstrual cycle, infertility, and even impotence in males. So again, we don't want these hormones getting out of balance at any time. They can cause a lot of problems. Right. So again, I'll go over this stuff with you on the chart that I'm going to give you. It basically has the same thing here. Right. You may want to look at these. They're good charts to go by, but the one that I'm going to test you on, I'll show you here in a minute if I can find it. Right. So it's a good stopping place for now, and I'm going to see if I can briefly find that. I may have to make another video. I'm about to go out here in my voice. I haven't felt good today. It's been rough when I thought I was getting a good bit better, but today's been kind of bad again. So, let me look and see where I might have this at. Let's see if I can look it up this way. Maybe I'll find it. said this is going to pull up correctly. I don't know if it will or not. Acting like it's a strange file for some reason. Yeah, this is the one I was looking at. Yeah, this is more in depth than the one I'm looking for. I'll make another video and show you that after I find it. All right. Anyway, I hope this helps a little bit, and I'll keep moving through this chapter, and hopefully we'll finish it up in the next couple of days if my voice holds up. I'm trying my best here. All right.